Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to walk you through solutions to problem 41 through maybe 44 or 45. These all involve writing your own methods. So there's kind of three parts that you need to pay attention to when you first create your method. And they are: what's the method name, what are the method inputs, and what should the method output. Sometimes my question might show you how a method is supposed to be used. So here I'm imagining that display n times is a method that already exists, and then you can see what is its name. You can see what the inputs are supposed to be. Here it's a string input followed by an integer input. And usually if you read the comment, it will say what it's supposed to do, and you can guess at what the output should be. Here it says it should display something. And whenever you have a method that just displays something, that means it doesn't have any output. You might think that displaying something counts as an output, but remember, displaying something just means you're printing a value to the console. Having an output means that you are returning a value. So if you just have a method on a line by itself where it's not on the right-hand side of like an equals sign that's assigning some value, or it's not inside a print statement, that means it's probably not giving back an output as an answer. Okay, so sometimes I might ask you like that, where I show you how it's going to be used, you look at the name, you look at the inputs, you guess the output. Sometimes I'll just describe it here. So for example, here I say you want to declare and implement a method called findAverage. So that's the name. It will take 3 integers as input, so that tells you what inputs, and then return their average. So their average is supposed to be the output, and you think, what data type is that going to be? Well, let's see. An average value is going to be a number, and usually averages, well, not usually, but an average might have a decimal part to it. So that means the data type should probably be a double as the return value. So let's jump on the computer and kind of see what these start to look like. So here's the prompt from problem 41. It said, imagine you have a display n times method that takes a string and an integer as input and displays this string that many times. So what does it look like to actually create the method? In the handout, I used 2 words. I said declare, and then I said implement. So show how to declare and how to implement a method. Declaring just means creating an empty template that just has the first line where it says the name and the input and the output. So I'll say public something display n times something. So you need to have this like deep in your bones. This is the name of your method. These are the inputs for your method. This is the data type for whatever the output for your method is. So here I have 2 inputs, a string and an int. So I'll make a string, which I'll call word. You can name it whatever you want, and this is just creating a string variable, just the way that you would if it was on a line by itself. And then an int called num. So now I see that these 2 variables match the values that I'm giving it here. So there's 2 of them, and the order is important. So the first one's a string, and the second one's an int. All right, we already talked about how this method doesn't have any output. So if it has no output, you'd write void here. All right, so that's declaring the method. I have defined what it's going to be like, but I haven't filled in the inside that actually makes it do that thing. So filling in the inside is called implementing the method. So let's implement it. I want to display this, so I know I'll have a, oops, excuse me. Go on, computer. So I know I'll have a system.out word. So that'll print whatever the first input is. But I want to do that a bunch of times. I want to do that num times. So if I want to do something a bunch of times, I know I'll need a loop. So I'll loop, let's see, int I equals 0, I less than something, I equals I plus 1. So now I'm displaying that first input 3 times. If I wanted to display it 8 times, I could make this 8. But the thing is, I don't want to display it 3 times. I don't want to display it 8 times. These are just examples of how I might want to use it. If I made this 1,000, I would want to display that word 1,000 times. So you have to think about what variable does this number get assigned to? So this 1000 gets assigned as an input here to num, and so num is actually how many times I want to be looping. All right, so that does it. You can double check that it works by running the code. Uh-oh, what does it not like? Oh, so you don't know about static and non-static yet. That needs to be static, but you don't need to worry about that. That's fine. All right, so let's run, and nothing's happened. So we got to try and figure out why did nothing happen. Let's make it simpler. Let's comment this one out to just look at that first one. So that seems to have worked. Hello, 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 3 times. I think it's because this 1000 is too large for my display. If I make this 8 again, yep, that's worked. So I see moo happening 8 times. You might notice that those are all together on one line. That's because I have a print here. It might be nice to just add an empty print line statement here so that when the command is done running, it moves to the next line. So now I've got hellos on one line, and then a new line, and then all the moos. All right, so that's problem 41. Let's just work our way down. So we'll do problem 42 now. So problem 42, I'm going to comment these out so I don't see their display. Problem 42 says declare and implement a method called findAverage. So I'll say public static blank findAverage, average, blank. Okay, a method called findAverage that will take 3 integers as inputs. All right, so here's my input. So I'll make 3 integers, A, B, and C. And then it says, and it will return their average. So the average of 3 numbers might have a decimal, so that means the output might be a double. So now I've declared my method. Now I implement it by making it actually do what it's supposed to do. So I'll create a double called answer, which is going to be A plus B plus C divided by 3.0. This is a subtle point. If I just divide it by 3, this is actually integer division, which means that after it divides it, it will chop off any decimal part at the end, which is called truncation. So I don't really want that. If there's a decimal part, I want that decimal part to get saved inside my answer double, my double answer. So if I have 3.0, that makes this into a double, which prevents that chopping off from happening. It prevents the truncation from happening. All right, if that didn't make any sense to you, it's a minor point, so you don't need to worry about it for now. So I'm going to return the answer, and I'm done. A slightly nicer way to write this, there's no sense in me assigning this value to a variable if all I'm going to do is return it. So I could cut out one line of code if I just wanted to return the output of that calculation directly. I'm trying to delete this line here. All right, so that does the same thing. It's a little bit shorter. So either way is okay. All right, let's look at the next problem. The next problem says show how to declare and implement a method called getLetterGrade, that's the name, which takes as input a number and returns a string. So there's one input and one return value. All right, so let's do that. So here I am. Public static something. The name is getLetterGrade something. So what's the input, what's the output? The problem says it takes an input that's a number between 0 and 100. So I'll say int num. And the output, it says, is a string, which is a letter, like A, B, C, etc. So there's string. All right, so now I've declared it because I've created this definition of what the method is. Now I'm going to implement it by making it actually do what it's supposed to do. So it says the input number is going to be in the range 0 to 100. So we should return A if it's in the A range and B if it's in the B range. So we could have a bunch of if statements. So if number is greater than or equal to 90, and number is less than or equal to 100, then I could return A. You could have a separate if statement here, or because all these ifs are related to each other, it might be better to have an else if. So if this isn't true, then let's test to see if number, is greater than or equal to 80. If it's greater than or equal to 80, then I could return B. Otherwise, if number is greater than or equal to 70, then I could return C. Otherwise, if number is greater than or equal to 60, I could return D. Otherwise, I'll return F. So anything less than 60, I'll return F. Okay, well, one thing you might notice is what happens if this input number is larger than 100? What happens if it's 102? In that case, none of these if statements are correct, or none of these if statements will evaluate to be true, and so it's going to return F, which is probably not what we want. So I'm going to delete this condition here. So now if it's any number above 90, even, 105 or whatever, excuse me, it'll return A anyway, which is more like what I want. All right, so that's that problem done. Let's look at this one. What I want you to get into the habit of doing is really have in your mind the template that you're trying to make this into. So all the time think, what's the method name, what inputs, what's the output. So here, write a method called feet to miles. That's the name. Takes a double as an input, and it returns a double as an output. So let's just write the declaration. Let's just declare it. So public static output feet to miles input. All right, so there's the declaration, but now I need to finish it by putting in the input variable and the output. So the input, I said, was a double. And it says a double representing some number of feet. So since my double is a number that represents the number of feet, I'm going to name it feet so that I know what it is. And then the output, it says, is also a double. That represents the number of miles. And what this method does is it takes this number of feet and it converts it to miles. So it says there's 5,280 feet per mile. So I think what I want to do is I want to take how many feet I have, take the input number of feet, I want to divide it by this, and that will tell me how many miles. So it's a simple unit conversion. So if you wanted to, you could declare a temporary variable to hold your answer. You could say feet divided by 5,280, and then you could return the answer. Or, like I said before, that's a little bit longer than it needs to be, so you could decide just to return that expression by itself. All right, I'll let you write 45 and 46, and instead I'll jump straight to 47. So 47, well, let's look at it. 47 says write a method called display numbers in a range that works as follows. So it looks like it takes two integers as input, and then it's just going to display things, so that's going to be a void output. In other words, no output. And it's going to display all the integers starting from the first input up to the second input. It looks like if we give inputs in the reverse order, then it doesn't display anything. So the first one has to be smaller than the second one. All right, let's write it. So we'll start public static something, display numbers in range something. All right, what's my input, what's my output? So the input, I said, was two numbers. I could call them int a, b, but maybe I'll call them int start, end, because like this is the starting number and this is the ending number. You could call them low and high, but in general, you should try and name your variables things that describe what they hold or what they're for. All right, I said that we're only displaying things, so the output is void. So I want to display a bunch of numbers between 2 and 6. So I know I'll need a print statement. But the problem is I can't display my start number and I can't display my end number because it's like the number of things I want to display depends on what these numbers are. So that's feeling to me like I want a loop. So there's lots of ways to solve this problem, as with any problem in programming. I'm going to initialize my loop counter num to start at my starting number. I'm going to say keep going as long as it's less than or equal to my ending number. and I want to add 1 every time. So you could do num plus plus, or you could do num equals num plus 1. Okay, and so now I'm going to print num. I'm going to print a space also because I think that's going to look nicer. Let's just run it and see if it does what it's supposed to do. So display numbers in range 2, 6. And so now when I run it, I see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that's good. If I make this 10 and I make this 5, and I run it again, great, 5 up to 10. You might have noticed that I'm not paying careful attention, like what happens if this is 10 and this is 5. If you thought that you wanted to have if statements here, that's a good intuition. So I could say if end is smaller than start, then I want to exit immediately by saying return. Or you could say only if start is larger than or equal to end. Sorry, other way around. Only if end is larger than or equal to start do I want to do this thing. So only if the numbers are in order do I actually want to do the code that displays them. And that's also okay. As it turns out, none of this is actually necessary because of how a for loop works. So let's imagine that I did it this way, where the first number is 10, the second number is 5. So that means start is 10, end is 5. So that means start is 10, so num starts out as 10. And the very first thing that happens is we ask, is number less than or equal to end? So num here was 10, end is 5. So it's not true that 10 is less than or equal to 5. And so since this looping condition is false, I don't even do the inside of the loop once. Instead, we just exit the loop. So that means I haven't displayed anything, which is what we'd want to have happen. Remember, because if these two numbers are reversed, we don't want to display anything. And just to prove that it works, I'll run it, and we see that nothing has happened. Okay, cool. I hope this has helped you.